and I just thought it might be interesting to learn a couple things about them. I've got a couple pages, so bear with me, please, because I'm going to have to read them, but they're a little interesting. The first Olympic Games are traced back to 776 BC. I could not find a stamp. I looked everywhere. The ancient games were celebrated until 393 AD. Olympia, of course, became the site of those historic games and were designated to honor the gods as a religious festival. During the competition, all trading was suspended, all war between states or cities was laid down arms, and people went forth in peace during the Olympics then. The ancient Olympics were not international in our modern sense of the term. They allowed only free men who spoke Greek and who were from Greek states to participate. The ancient Olympic game was just one competing event. That's all it was. It was called a stadion or a stade race. It was from one end of the stadium to the other. That was it. But then after that, other events were added, like chariot racing, wrestling, boxing, javelin, discus throwing, and a couple of others. Married women were not allowed to participate or even to attend. However, unmarried women could watch. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
The official award that was presented at the last day of the races was presented on an elevated place in the temple of Zeus. And the judge, who was called a herald, announced the winner's name, his father's name, and his homeland. And a sacred olive wreath was, of course, placed on his head. We've seen that in pictures, I guess. That peaceful spirit was the vision for reviving the games in 1890, in the 1890s, and that's the modern Olympics. Started in the 1890s, and that's what we know today. Of course, the goal was to build a better world by educating youth through sport. Just as the ancient Greeks prayed at the temple of Zeus to play fair, today's athletes take an oath of sportsmanship, honor, and goodwill. The modern symbols of peace include the torch, also called the flame of peace, and the doves at the opening ceremonies. The first modern Olympic Games were held in Athens, Greece in 1896, and 100,000 spectators watched 311 athletes from 13 countries. This is back in 1896. They competed in just 9 sports. In 2024, by the way, this coming Olympics, there will be 10,500 athletes as compared to 300. The first games were not publicized outside of Europe, but a group of United States college students that were athletes from Princeton and Harvard found out about the games over there and were excited by the idea, so they recruited a coach and paid their expenses themselves for the most part, and traveled to Athens, Greece to compete themselves. Today, by the way, there are 4 Olympic Games. There's Summer Olympics, Winter Olympics, Youth Olympics, and Paralympics. I'll show you some examples in just a little bit here. Until 1992, the Summer and the Winter Games were all held in the same year. But because it was felt that the Summer Games overshadowed the Winter Games because of cost and logistics, and the International Olympic Committee voted to alter the schedule so they're 2 years apart. The summer, and then 2 years later, the winter, and so on. The Olympic symbol. I think I'll pass this around. The rings symbol shows 5 inhabited continents. That's what they stand for, the world in the world, and their interlocking shows how the athletes compete together. The blue is Europe, the yellow is Asia, the black is Africa, the green is Oceania, and the red is America. The Olympic model, coined by educator Father Dryden, is Citius Altius Fortius, I think it is. It's Latin for swifter, higher, stronger. The 29-cent Olympic flag stamp was promoted in 1992 Olympics. The first United States Olympic stamp was issued January 25, 1932. You know, it's interesting, here. It was during the 3rd Winter Olympics that were held for the first time in the United States. It was in Lake Placid, a small town in upstate New York, a home to less than 3,000 residents at that time. The Lake Placid Chamber of Commerce asked the postmaster to suggest a commemorative stamp for the event. A New York congressman finally helped to persuade reluctant officials, and the stamp was made. It was amazing. They actually had serious arguments about why we should ever issue an Olympic stamp. Then less than 2 months later, in the Summer Olympics, they were held in Paris, France. In Los Angeles. They made a 2nd and a 3rd stamp, which is that one there. The 2024 upcoming Olympics are going to be held in Paris, France, July 26th, by the way, which is the 3.5 months from now, until August the 11th, and there will be 10,500 athletes from around the world. The upcoming summer game mascot is called a fridge. Here's a couple more of those, by the way.
Play for the Bears.
You'll see this, but it's a takeoff on a hat from France, an old time hat. But that's their mascot. the Berlin Olympics. I don't know if you remember this or have read about it, but in 1936 was awarded to Germany before the Nazis came into power, and the games provided a perfect opportunity for Hitler to showcase his Third Reich to the 49 nations that were there, and he sat in the stands and watched his country compete. The 1936 pre-game torch relay was done for the first time then. I thought a couple people would be interesting here. Jesse Owens, you've probably heard that name. He was an African American who brought the United States 4 gold medals at that 1936 Olympic game. He was born James Cleveland Owens and moved from Alabama to Cleveland, Ohio when he was 10 years old. And once while he was in Cleveland, he excelled in track, big time, 100 meter, 200 meter, and so on, long jump. And during his college years, he's continued to face discrimination and lack of support. He had a hard time studying, but his coach, Carl Riley, encouraged him to accomplish his Olympic dreams. There's a couple stamps of his. I bought a book the other day that was the history of Jim Thorpe. You've probably heard that name also, but he was amazing. He really, of course, came from absolutely nothing and was an Indian, American Indian. He was born in 1887 in Indian Territory in Oklahoma, and he had a lot of problems himself, keeping himself from trouble. He was in jail a few times. He was in prison once. Even as a young kid, he was really, he did not like school, so he very rarely attended, of course. But it's quite a. I should have brought the book because I really recommend it for anybody who's interested in some history, but because it was history mostly of his Oklahoma tribes and what they went through. You know, they started out. His father started out in, I believe it was Wisconsin or Minnesota. Then they forced them to, of course, with that march, move down to Kansas, and then they forced him to move to Oklahoma. And then he left Oklahoma and worked in Texas in the Panhandle for a while as a ranch hand. And then he went back to Oklahoma. But anyway, he's quite an interesting guy. Jim Thorpe. He was, I should say, where does it say that? He was an Olympic champion, decathlete in the track and field. He was a football All-American. He also was a star professional football player. He was the first president of the National Football League. He was a Major League Baseball player. He was a ballroom dancer that was very famous in that day, and a gifted swimmer, and a champion ice skater.
Wow.
That's amazing, you know? Jim Thorpe. During his life, many college athletes earned $25 a week. That's what they earned by playing minor league baseball. They would use an alias name because they weren't allowed to play minor league. However, one time he played baseball in North Carolina and he signed his own name. The Olympic Committee, the American Olympic Committee at that time, used that proof to strip him of all of his medals from the Olympics. The medals that were awarded were in fact restored and returned by the International Olympic Committee 100 years later, June 25, last year, 2023. Jim Thorpe died of a heart attack in 1953 at the age of 64. He was married 3 times and he had 8 children. I don't know if you want to pass that around. There's his stamp and his thing. Paralympics began in 1950. Early in 1960s, Eunice Kennedy Shriver saw how unfairly people with disabilities were treated, and many of the children did not have a place to play. Her vision took shape with summer camps and eventually grew into the Special Olympic movement. We probably all heard that. The first International Olympics for the Paralympics were held at Soldier Field in Chicago, July the 19th and 20th in 1968, and it had 1,000 participants. I don't know why they have that. I have that in there. Oh, here. I do have some pass outs. I'm not going to have a super long program, so you'll have to forgive me, but I have a couple pass outs, and I'd like you to keep one. That's a list of every Olympics we've ever had in the modern Olympics. Oh yeah. In the 2021 Tokyo Olympic, Russian athletes competed under a flag of ROC, which is Russian Olympic Committee, rather than their native country. I don't know if anybody knew that or not, but the 335 competing athletes that were competing were considered to be neutrals, not from Russia, because they wouldn't allow them.
That was 92.
2021 and 2019, the World Anti-Doping Agency banned Russia from all international sporting competitions, including the Olympics, for 4 years because of doping. That was in 2019. Yeah, keep those list of Olympic Games. I just thought it was interesting. You can, next year, I forget where it is next year, but they show next year, the last one for next year. I have a trivia sheet also I thought was kind of interesting. One of them, I'm going to pass this out and you can read the rest of them, but Russia and Belarus will not be invited to participate in this Olympics because of their Ukraine aggression. That's all I got.
2021 was because of the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
It was out of season.
Yes.
All right, any questions for Jim?
Sorry it's short, but I thought that was kind of interesting because
Very good.
the Olympics is just 3 months
Just coming
away.
up, very timely.
Yeah.
Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thanks.